A dark romance series. The Monster Who Owned Me. Part 5. What remains? You learn who someone is. Not in the good hours. You learn them in the waiting rooms. In the hours when nothing can be fixed. And you are still there. Chapter 1. The Drive Back. Violet the Crest, Saturday afternoon. He drove the way he did everything under pressure. Efficiently, without wasted motion, his hands on the wheel in the particular configuration of someone who has decided the road, is a problem to solve and is solving it. The gray car ate the miles between the crest and the city in silence that was not uncomfortable, but was heavy, the specific weight of two people managing the same fear from slightly different positions. I watched his hands on the wheel. I had, over the past 14 weeks, learned to read him through his hands more reliably than his face. The face he controlled. The hands were honest, the tension in the knuckles when something cost him, the stillness when he was thinking, the barely perceptible loosening when something resolved. Right now his hands were tight on the wheel at 10 and 2, the classic configuration of controlled anxiety, and they had not changed since we'd left the crest 40 minutes ago. He had said 3 sentences since the phone call. Elena collapsed this morning. She is in the hospital. They don't know yet what it means. I had said, then we go now, and gotten in the car. I hadn't asked for details. I hadn't asked what hospital, what ward, which doctors. These were questions with answers he would give me when he had them, and the asking before he had them would only cost him the energy of managing my need for information when his energy was currently required elsewhere. This was something I'd learned about him. When he was afraid, he needed presence more than questions. He needed someone in the passenger seat who was simply there, who had chosen to be there, who did not require him to perform or explain or manage. He needed the thing I'd given him in the library with the blanket, the care that didn't demand its own reception. So I sat. And I watched the miles and the bare November trees, and the sky doing the thing November skis do in upstate New York. The low, specific gray of something that has decided to be gray without apology. And I thought about Elena. I thought about her painting, the red of it, the urgency. I thought about cautiously, I am cautiously, and the way she'd said it with the precision of someone who had learned never to claim more than the current moment allowed. I thought about 12 feet up a ladder, and the expression on his face below me, and the way certain moments feel like photographs in the making. Images you know you'll carry, that have the quality of things being recorded in a register deeper than memory. I thought, she has to be all right. I did not say it. Some things you don't say because saying them makes space for the alternative. An hour and 40 minutes into the drive, somewhere on the approach to the city, his right hand came off the wheel and found mine on the console between us. He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on the road. His hand held mine with the firm, deliberate grip of someone making a statement rather than a gesture. I held on. We drove the rest of the way like that. The hospital was on the Upper East Side, private, the specific quiet of institutions that cost enough to purchase their own stillness. Nora was in the lobby when we arrived, which meant she'd been here for hours, managing the situation with the competence I'd come to understand as her primary mode of caring for the people in her charge. She gave Adrian the update in 45 seconds, standing in the lobby with her legal pad and her controlled expression and the specific tightness around her eyes that was her version of worry. The collapse had been sudden, no warning signs, or none that the daily check-in that morning had flagged. The on-call medical team had responded within 6 minutes. She was stable now. The oncologist was reviewing the scans. "Can I see her?" Adrian asked. "Room 412. She's awake. Nora paused. "She's asking for Violet." We both looked at Nora. "She said," Nora continued, with the careful neutrality of someone conveying a message she found unexpected, and I am quoting, "Tell Adrian to stop hovering outside the door and send Violet in first." Something moved across his face. Not hurt. He was too practiced for that to show clearly. But something adjacent to it, the expression of a man receiving information that confirms something he already suspected about the hierarchy of things. "Go," he said to me. I went. Chapter 2. What she tells me. Violet, room 412. She looked smaller in the hospital bed. This was the only thought I had for the first 5 seconds. That Alina Vasic, who in the 17th floor studio had occupied her space with the complete physical confidence of a person who understood that their body was their instrument, looked smaller here, in the white and the monitoring equipment and the particular institutional light that reduced everything to its essentials. But her eyes were open and her expression, when she saw me, was entirely herself, direct, assessing, the faint exasperation of someone who is being made a fuss of and finds it disproportionate. You came from the Crest, she said. We left as soon as Nora called. You shouldn't have. There is nothing to do here. I know, I said. We came anyway. She looked at me for a moment. Then something in her face softened, not dramatically, not the melodrama of illness at its most performed, but genuinely the small softening of someone who has been alone with something frightening and has just been joined. Sit, she said. I sat in the chair beside the bed. The collapse was a medication interaction, she said, with the matter-of-factness of someone who has been managing their own medical situation long enough to have developed a clinical vocabulary for it. The new protocol they started 3 weeks ago, one of the compounds reacted with something in the existing treatment. It created a drop in blood pressure that was, she paused. That was significant, for about 4 minutes. 4 minutes, the words sat in the room. The oncologist says it is fixable, she continued. The protocol will be adjusted. The underlying treatment continues. The trajectory, another pause, more careful. The trajectory is not changed by this. They do not think it is changed. They don't think, I said. Medicine is full of things they don't think, she said. I have made my peace with the probability language. I looked at her. At the monitors, the IV line, the evidence of 4 minutes that had been significant. Are you afraid? I asked. She was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that is its own answer. I was afraid this morning, she said finally. For the 4 minutes and for the hour after. Then she stopped. Then I was angry again, which is better. Fear is passive, anger is useful. Elena. I know, she looked at her hands. The IV line taped to the inside of her wrist, the paint under her fingernails that no amount of hospital processing had fully removed. I know what you're going to say. What am I going to say? That it is all right to be afraid. That fear does not mean weakness. That, she stopped. That you are here. That is what you were going to say without words. I took her hand, the one without the IV line. She looked at it. Then she looked at me. I told you to send Adrian in first, I said. I told them to send you. Why? She looked at the ceiling for a moment. Because he needs to see me all right, and I am not yet entirely all right, and I knew that if he came in first and saw me not entirely all right, he would. A breath. He would go somewhere inside himself that takes a very long time to come back from. I needed you to tell me first whether I was all right enough for him to see. I looked at her. You could have asked him to wait. He does not wait well, she said. You know this. I know this, I agreed. Am I all right enough? She asked. I looked at her, at the smaller version in the hospital bed, at the direct eyes, at the paint under her nails, and the strength in the hand holding mine, despite the IV line and the monitors, and the 4 minutes that had been significant. Yes, I said, you're all right enough. Then send him in. I went to the door, opened it. He was in the corridor, exactly where I expected him, standing against the opposite wall with his arms crossed, and his face doing the controlled thing and his eyes already on the door the moment I opened it. The immediate full attention snap of someone who has been waiting with every resource directed at a single point. She's all right, I said. She wants to see you. He moved past me into the room. I stayed in the corridor. I leaned against the wall across from the door and looked at the institutional ceiling and breathed. Through the door, which I had not fully closed, I heard the sound of a chair being moved. A low voice, his saying something I couldn't make out. Elena's voice, slightly dry, responding. Then a sound I'd never heard from him before, not quite a laugh, not quite its relief-adjacent cousin, something released. I stayed in the corridor for 20 minutes. Then Nora appeared with 2 coffees and the expression of someone who has decided that competent support is the form love takes in professional contexts, and handed me one without a word, and we stood together in the corridor and drank them. We were in the hospital until 9. The oncologist came at 6 with the adjusted protocol and the kind of measured reassurance that doctors who are good at their jobs deliver with precision, not false comfort, not catastrophizing, but the exact weight of what was known and what wasn't, the probability language that Alina had described making peace with. The interaction had been identified. The adjustment would take effect immediately. The underlying treatment trajectory was, in the oncologist's assessment, unchanged. Alina was discharged at 8:30 with a monitoring schedule and a list of symptoms to watch for and the specific instruction to rest, which she received with the expression of someone who has been told to rest by a medical professional and is calculating how to technically comply while continuing to paint. Adrian arranged the transport back to the building. He sat beside Alina in the car, not touching, just beside, the proximity of someone who needs to know that the person is physically present, and I sat across from them, and Nora was in the front, and the city came back around us as we drove downtown, the lights multiplying as we descended from the Upper East Side into Midtown and then Lower Manhattan. Alina fell asleep in the car. This was, I understood from the quality of it, the immediate, total drop into unconsciousness of someone whose body has been running crisis protocols all day and has now been given permission to stop, a good sign. The sleep of the safe. Adrian watched her sleep for a moment, then he looked at me. His face, in the city light moving through the car windows, was the most honest I'd seen it in the acute version. Not the gentle honesty of the library and the blanket and the second kiss, but the raw honesty of someone who has been frightened down to the bone and is still reassembling. I reached across and put my hand over his, not a gesture, a statement, the same kind he'd made on the drive from the crest. He turned his hand over and held mine. We didn't speak. Alina slept between us. The city moved past the windows in its beautiful, indifferent way. That was enough. That was entirely enough. Chapter 3. What happens to the body? Violet, the following days. The week after the hospital had a different texture from the weeks before it. Not worse. I want to be specific about that, because worse implies a downward direction, and what happened was more lateral, a shift sideways into a different kind of intimacy. The kind that comes after fear. After you've sat in a hospital corridor and held a hand in a car and understood that the thing you're building is capable of being tested and is, provisionally, holding. He came to the studio every day that week. Sometimes for the work, the installation was entering its final design phase, the fabrication team engaged, the timeline committed, and sometimes not for the work at all, or not only. Sometimes he came at 7 in the evening when the building was emptying and sat in the chair by the window and said very little, and I worked around him, and the room was comfortable in its silence, the way rooms are comfortable when the people in them have stopped needing to fill the space with performance. I started to understand what Alina had meant by 2 total. Not because it frightened me. It didn't, or not in the way she described, not the frightening of someone who can't bear being the center of that much attention. I was accustomed to solitude. I had chosen solitude, largely, for 4 years in New York, the solitude of someone who knows that the work requires a certain quality of inner quiet and guards it. Being the focus of Adrian Kane's attention was not the opposite of that quiet. It sounds strange to say this, a different kind of it. His attention was total, but it was not demanding. He watched, he listened, he was there, but he did not require me to perform for the watching. This was, I suspected, new behavior for him, learned behavior. The behavior of a man who has understood, through the specific education of caring about someone for the right reasons, that attention is not the same as possession. He was learning. He was learning imperfectly, in the way real learning happens, with backslides and wrong turns and the occasional reversion to the default. But the learning was real. I could see it in the quality of the silences, in the questions he asked before making decisions, in the way he'd started saying, "What do you think?" and actually waiting for the answer instead of receiving it as information to be weighed against his prior conclusion. I told Alina this on a Wednesday, sitting in her room with the coffee I'd started bringing daily since the hospital. An act she'd initially said was unnecessary, and then, by the third day, had begun to rely on with the specific reliance of someone who has decided that care, when offered consistently, is worth accepting. "He is trying," she agreed. "I can see it." A pause. "He is also still himself. You understand that. The trying does not change the architecture. It only changes how the architecture is used." "I know," I said. "I don't want him changed. I want him." I thought about how to say it. "Directed like the light. You don't change the light. You angle the glass." Alina looked at me for a moment. Then she picked up her sketchbook. She'd been sketching small things since the hospital, conserving energy while her body recalibrated, the paintings temporarily set aside, and made a note. I'd learned to recognize this. When I said something she found useful, she wrote it down, not quoting me, somewhere for it to go. "The portrait," she said. "I want to finish it when I have the energy." "When you have the energy," I said. "It is important to me." She looked at the canvas, still half done against the wall. "I started it wanting to understand you. I think I understand you now. I want to finish it while the understanding is still fresh." "What did you conclude?" I asked. "About understanding me?" She looked at me directly. "That you are the person who stays," she said. "Not because you don't know when to leave. You know very well when to leave. But because you decide with full information that staying is the right thing. That is," she paused. "That is very rare. Most people who stay do so because they don't see clearly. You see clearly and stay anyway." The room was quiet. "He needs that," she said. "Specifically that, someone who sees him clearly and stays." "I know," I said. "Do you?" Her gaze was very direct. "Because there are things you haven't seen yet, things about him that are harder, that the last months haven't shown you yet, the full weight of what he is." "Tell me," I said. A pause. "It's not mine to tell," she said. "He has to tell you, but I want you to know that they exist, so that when they come, and they will come, you are not surprised." I looked at her. "How hard?" She held my gaze. "Hard enough," she said, "that it will be the real test, not the headlines or the scheduled weekends or the unilateral decisions, something older, heavier, the thing he has been carrying since before me." I thought about what she could mean. I had not gotten to the bottom of Adrian Kane. I was aware of that. 14 weeks and a great deal of intimacy, and I still felt the shape of something I hadn't found the door to. Something in the foundation. "All right," I said. "All right. All right, I'll be ready." Alina looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, with the nod of someone who has said what they needed to say and is satisfied that it was heard. "Good," she said. "Now tell me about the installation. The beams from the crest, did you find a way to use the east-facing ones?" We talked about the work for an hour. The fear receded to its appropriate distance. The city did its city things outside the window. Alina's hands were steady on her sketchbook. Cautiously, I thought. We are all cautiously. Chapter 4. The Foundation. Violet, 2 weeks later. I found the second room by accident. Not the 17th floor, I'd found that by invitation, key card in a sketchbook, the deliberate leaving of a door ajar. This was different. This was a locked door in the basement level of the Kane Tower building, below the parking structure, in the part of the building that existed in none of the architectural plans I'd been working from. I was there because the fabrication team needed access to the building's original structural drawings, which were stored in physical archive in the basement. This was one of the eccentricities of Kane Tower, that certain foundational documents were maintained in hard copy below the building, rather than in the digital systems above it. I'd gone down with a building manager to retrieve a specific set of load-bearing calculations for the atrium ceiling. The building manager, a careful, competent man named David who had worked in the building for 8 years, had taken me to the archive room and then received a call that required him to step out. I was alone in the archive, looking through the drawing sets when I saw it. A door. At the back of the archive space, behind a row of filing cabinets that had been positioned in a way that suggested they were meant to obscure rather than simply store. Not locked in the way of secure rooms, locked in the way of rooms that aren't meant to be noticed. I noticed it. I did not try the door. I noted its existence, noted its position in the building's basement level, noted the way the cabinets in front of it were arranged, and filed the information without acting on it. Because I had learned, in 14 weeks of living inside this building's architecture, that the rooms I wasn't shown were shown to me eventually, when the time was right, when he had found the language. But I thought about it. And that evening, when he came to the studio, I looked at him, at the face I now knew in its many registers, the controlled and the unguarded and the everything between, and I thought about what Alina had said, things you haven't seen yet, the thing he has been carrying since before me. He noticed the looking. He noticed everything. What? He said. Nothing, I said. I'm thinking. About. I considered whether to say it, the door in the basement, the cabinet arrangement, the part of the building that didn't appear on any plan. I decided not yet. Some things need the right question before the right answer is available. About the installation timeline, I said. We need to talk about February. He accepted this. We talked about February. But later, in the elevator going down, I looked at the floor indicators as I passed each level 42, 41, 40, and thought about architecture. About the things buildings contain that their drawings don't show. About what it means that a man who builds in order to control has, in the foundations of his own building, a room he hasn't shown me. About what Alina had said, it will be the real test. About the distance between 14 weeks of knowing and the thing in the foundation. He told me the night before Christmas Eve. I note the timing because it wasn't accidental. Nothing he did was accidental, and the choice of a specific night, a specific hour, with the specific quality of city silence that comes in the dead week between holidays when the usual traffic of life recedes and the real things become more visible, was itself a statement. He had chosen the quietest possible container for the loudest possible truth. We were in the penthouse library. This had become our room, the kitchen for meals, the office when work required it, but the library as the primary space, the room that had accumulated the particular warmth of habitual presence, the worn chairs and the blanket, and the drawing of the crest in its frame bearing witness to a dozen evenings of the kind of conversation that doesn't have an agenda except the honest one. He had been quiet all evening. Not the thoughtful quiet I knew. This was the quiet of someone carrying something toward a moment, managing the distance between where they are and where they're going. I want to tell you something, he said. The specific phrase. Not can I tell you or there's something you should know, but the statement of intention, the declaration that this was coming regardless of my response to the opening. Tell me, I said. He looked at the drawing of the crest, then at me. My father, he said. There are things about my father you don't know, that I haven't told you, that I have not told anyone. I said nothing. I held the space. He was not, he stopped, started again. He was not my mother's partner in the way that word usually means. He was her investor. He funded several of her projects in the early years when she was building her practice. He was, a pause with weight in it. He was powerful, and he used that power in ways that... He stopped again. His hands were on the arms of the chair, and the knuckles were tight, and this was the truest version of the tells I'd learned to read. Not the fractional shifts of the controlled surface, but the body speaking clearly underneath it. He did not leave her alone, he said. When she wanted to end the professional relationship, the money became control. The access became, he looked at the ceiling. I was 19 when she died. I didn't understand everything I know now, but I understood enough. The room was very quiet. The city beyond the windows was in its holiday stillness, the particular hush of a city that has briefly decided to pause. His name, I said quietly, is it someone I'd know? His name is Richard Cresswell, he said. I knew the name. Everyone in the city knew the name. Cresswell Capital, 40 years of New York finance. The name on 2 hospital wings and an arts foundation and a building at Columbia. I started. He's still very much present, Adrian said. He's been present my entire adult life. The Crest's legal dispute, the developer who holds the demolition order, is a subsidiary of a holding company that traces back to Cresswell Capital. I went very still. He's been fighting you on the Crest, I said. Specifically. He's been fighting me on everything specifically, Adrian said. For 15 years, the Crest is the most visible, but there have been others. Properties, projects, opportunities that appeared and then dissolved, in ways that had Cresswell fingerprints on them if you knew where to look. He knows who you are, I said. He's known all along. He knew before I did, Adrian said. He knew before I understood that the man who funded my mother's early career and then made her last years. He stopped. He's known since I was born who I was. I found out who he was when I was 22. The silence stretched. I thought about 15 years. About a son, 22 years old, discovering the architecture of his own life in a way that collapsed and rebuilt it simultaneously. About 15 years of building Kane Capital, Kane Tower, the portfolio, the power, with a specific and unspoken purpose. The company, I said. All of it, you built it specifically large enough to. Yes, he said. To reach him, to be able to stand at the same level and look him in the eye and not destroy him. I'm not. He looked at his hands. I'm not interested in destruction. I want the Crest. I want what he took from my mother returned to its meaning. I want to be able to say with the full weight of everything I've built, you did not win. She did not become nothing. Her work is here inside my work and it will outlast you. The words landed in the room, and I sat with them. I sat with all of it, the architecture of the last 15 years, the building as instrument, the company as accumulated force directed at a single purpose that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with a 19-year-old who had lost his mother and inherited the shape of why. I thought about salvage, about what it means to make something from what you couldn't protect. Adrian, I said. He looked at me. His face was fully unguarded, the most exposed I'd seen him, stripped down to the actual person, the man behind the building, behind the company, behind the controlled voice. Why now? I asked. Why tell me now? A pause. Because in 2 months the demolition happens, he said. And when it does, I'm going to move against Cresswell directly. Through the board, through the legal channels, through the documentation that the installation is assembling, I'm going to make the connection between the Crest and what he did public. It will be significant. It will be, he stopped. It will be loud. And I needed you to know why, before the loud, before you're inside it without knowing the shape of it. I thought about Alina's words. It will be the real test. I looked at him, at the 15 years of it, at the specific gravity of a plan held for that long, at the man who had built 42 floors of steel and glass as the instrument of a promise made to a dead mother. I'm in, I said. Violet. I'm in, I said again. I know what I'm saying. I'm in. He looked at me for a long time. The library was quiet around us, the drawing of the Crest on the wall, the city in its holiday hush beyond the windows. You don't know everything yet, he said. About Cresswell, there are things that are. Tell me when you're ready, I said. I'll be here. He reached across and took my face in both hands, the gesture that was his language, the careful, specific reverence of someone handling something irreplaceable, and looked at me for a long moment. I don't deserve this, he said quietly. You're doing it again, I said. What? Deciding what you deserve without consulting me. Something broke open in his expression. The real smile, the full, unguarded, enormous smile that happened so rarely I kept each instance like pressed flowers. You're right, he said. I know, I said. He kissed me. The third kiss, which was different again from the first and the second, the kiss of something that had passed through fear and disclosure and hospital corridors, and arrived at a place that had a different quality from everything before it. The quality of something that has been tested and is standing. The city was quiet outside. The drawing of the Crest witnessed everything, as it always did. Chapter 5. Christmas. Violet, December 24th. I spent Christmas Eve on the 17th floor. This was my idea. Not a grand gesture, more the quiet decision of someone who has looked at the available options and identified which one is right. Alina had no family in this country, and the building was skeleton-staffed for the holiday, and the thought of her alone on the 17th floor with her coffee maker and her canvases on the night that the whole city conspired to remind people of their solitude was not one I could comfortably hold. I brought food, too much of it, the particular overprovision of someone cooking for another person for the first time and unsure of the calibration. Alina received it with the expression of someone who finds the overprovision both unnecessary and deeply touching, and is choosing to respond to the second. Adrian came at 7. He arrived with wine and the specific diffidence of someone who has not spent many Christmases in company and isn't entirely sure of the protocols, which I found unexpectedly moving. The three of us ate on Alina's floor, literally on the floor, cross-legged, the way she'd arranged things because the room didn't have a proper dining table and she'd never seen the need for one. The wine was extraordinary. The food was abundant. Alina told a story about a Christmas in Bratislava when she was 7 that involved a goat, a neighbor's fence, and a misunderstanding about the nature of gift-giving that escalated over 3 days and was still, 40 years later, the subject of municipal debate in the relevant neighborhood. I laughed until I couldn't breathe. Adrian laughed, the real one, the full one, the one that happened rarely and landed in the room like an event. Alina looked at him when he laughed with the expression of someone witnessing something they'd hoped for but not quite expected, and I watched her watching him and understood that this was also a gift she was giving him, the occasion to laugh without managing it. Later, when Alina had fallen asleep in her chair, the recovery was still taking something from her, the evenings short, the body asserting its requirements. Adrian and I washed the dishes in the small kitchenette side by side, in the comfortable domestic silence of people who have found their shared rhythm in enclosed spaces. She seems better, I said. The scan this week was good, he said. The adjusted protocol is working. The oncologist used the word responding again, and this time she didn't add a qualifier. I looked at him. The relief in his face, carefully present beneath the even tone, was the kind that comes after long fear, not the sharp relief of crisis resolved, but the slow, gradual relief of something terrible that is, provisionally, becoming less terrible. Good, I said. The word was not sufficient. I said it anyway because some things need to be said simply. Good, he agreed. We finished the dishes. He dried. I stacked. Alina slept in her chair with the particular trust of someone who has unconsciously decided that this room is safe enough for unguarded sleep, which was itself a gift. We left together at 10, Adrian walking me to the elevator, standing in the corridor in the building's holiday quiet. Come up, he said. I looked at him, the penthouse. I don't want you to go home to an empty apartment on Christmas Eve, he said. It came out directly, without the usual management, the plain statement of someone who has given up performing about what they want. I thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. All right, I said. We went up. The penthouse on Christmas Eve was different from every other version of it I'd inhabited. The city outside was doing the thing it does on this one night. Whatever combination of cold and stillness and shared expectation produces the specific quality of December 24th in New York, the city briefly unified in something, the usual edges softened. He'd put something on music, very low, the kind of music that exists in rooms rather than performance spaces. We sat in the library and talked, and didn't talk in the comfortable alternation that had become our primary mode, and outside the windows the city did its Christmas thing, and inside the library the fire that he didn't usually light was lit. Tell me something I don't know about you, he said. It was late, or late adjacent, the hour when conversations move to the places they avoid in the daytime. Something small or something large? Either. I thought about it. I was engaged once, I said. In the last year of school. to someone who was very good and very kind and who loved me in the way that is clear and simple and does not contain anything that frightens you. He looked at me. What happened? I left, I said, not because he did anything wrong, because I knew very clearly that the life I was going to live inside it was not the full-size version of the life I needed, that I would spend it comfortable and safe, and at about 60% of what I was capable of. I paused. I left and I moved to New York and I spent 4 years in a studio and I was at various points lonely and broke and frightened, and I do not regret it for 1 minute. He was quiet for a moment. 60%, he said. Some people are fine with 60%, I said. I'm not built for it. No, he said, you're not. A pause. What are you at now? I looked at him, at the fire, at the drawing on the wall, at the city outside that had brought me here from Ohio with a duffel bag, and an appetite I didn't have a name for yet. Ask me again in the spring, I said, when the installation is done and the crest situation is resolved, and we've been through the loud you warn me about. And then I'll tell you, I looked at him, but I'll tell you this now, it's higher than it's ever been. He reached over and took my hand. We sat in the library while the city slept its Christmas sleep outside, and the fire did what fires do, and the drawing of the crest was in its frame, and we were both, for the first time in a very long time, warm. Chapter 6. January. Violet, the New Year. January arrived with the specific brutality of New York winters, the cold moving from seasonal to fundamental, the city stripped of its December softness, and returned to its essential, indifferent self. The installation entered its final phase. The fabrication team had been working since November, but January was when it became visible. When the pieces began to arrive at the building, when the atrium was temporarily closed for the installation of the structural rigging, when the thing I'd been building in model and sketch and material study for 16 weeks began to exist in the physical world at the scale it was always meant to inhabit. The first beam from the crest arrived on a Tuesday. Adrian was in a board meeting when the delivery came. I was in the atrium when the fabricators brought it in, a single beam, white oak, original to the building his mother had designed in 1985, marked at one end with a small notation in pencil that I recognized as her handwriting from the letters in his archive. East Wall, Main Room, M.W. I held it for a moment before directing the fabricators to its position. Just held it, the physical reality of it, the weight of old wood, the specific density of material that has been in a space for 40 years and carries the memory of that space in its grain. The crest in my hands, his mother's building in my hands. I know what I'm making, I thought. I've always known, but now I know it in my hands. He came to the atrium at noon. Slipping away from the board, meeting with the focused urgency of someone who has their priorities correctly ordered. He stood at the edge of the atrium and looked at the beam in its position, the first piece, the beginning of the structure, and he was very still. I watched him from across the atrium. He stood like that for a long time. Then he looked up and found me across the space, and the look that passed between us over 40 feet of unfinished atrium floor was, I will not try to describe it precisely. Some things resist precision. Some things are better held in their full complexity than reduced to language. He nodded once. I nodded back. We got back to work. The letter arrived on a Thursday in mid-January. It came through the building's mail system, which was itself unusual for personal correspondence. The building had extensive protocols for Adrian's personal mail, none of which involved the standard delivery system. Someone had put it there deliberately, routing it through the ordinary channel as a statement. I know your systems and I am choosing not to be stopped by them. Nora brought it to me, not to him, which told me she'd identified the sender and made a judgment call. She set it on my workbench without comment and left. The envelope was cream, heavy paper. The return address was a firm on Park Avenue that I recognized as one of the most storied legal practices in the city. Inside, a single-page formal letterhead, 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph established the identity of the sender, Richard Cresswell, through his counsel. The second paragraph acknowledged the ongoing Kane Tower renovation project and noted, with the specific language of someone who has been watching carefully, that the installation component appeared to incorporate materials from a property currently subject to a demolition order in which Cresswell Capital held an interest. The third paragraph contained a request, not a demand. The language was careful, the distinction deliberate. A request for a meeting between Adrian Kane, Violet Hayes, and Richard Cresswell personally, to discuss the nature of the installation and its materials and the ongoing matter of the Crest property. At the bottom, handwritten below the lawyer's signature, "I think it is time we spoke. R.C." I read it 3 times. Then I took a photograph of it and sent it to Adrian with no message. He called in 40 seconds. "Where did it come from?" His voice was the controlled voice, but underneath it something I hadn't heard before, not quite anger, not quite fear, the specific register of someone whose 15-year plan has just been contacted directly. "Building mail. Nora brought it to me." A pause. "He knows about you." "He's known about me since at least the article," I said. "Probably longer. He's been watching this project." "He's watching me," Adrian said. "He's always watching me." A beat. "He wants to negotiate. Or he wants to know what you have before he decides how to respond to it." "Yes." His voice had the quality of someone working something out in real time, the mental calculation visible through the silence. He wouldn't request a meeting if he wasn't concerned. He's seen the fabrication team, the materials, the connection between the installation and the Crest. "He's worried," I said. "He should be," Adrian said quietly. I thought about the basement room, the door behind the cabinets, the part of the building that appeared on no plan. Something told me that what was inside that room was connected to what had just arrived in a cream envelope. "Adrian," I said, "the basement, the room off the archive." A silence, long enough to confirm. "You found it," he said. "I didn't go in, I just saw the door." Another silence. "Come to the penthouse tonight," he said. "I'll show you the rest." The rest. The word sat in my chest with the weight of everything Alina had warned me about. "All right," I said. I put the letter down and looked at the installation, the beam from the Crest in its position, the beginning of the structure, the first piece of his mother's building inside his building, and I thought about foundations, about what you build on and what you find when you dig. Tonight, apparently, I was going to find out. Chapter 7. The room below everything. Adrian, that evening. He'd been waiting 15 years to show someone this room. That was not entirely accurate. He'd been waiting 15 years to be the kind of person who could show someone this room, who had built enough, assembled enough evidence, reached enough of a position that the room's contents were not just the obsession of a 19-year-old boy, but the documented, verified, legally actionable record of what Richard Cresswell had done. The room was not dramatic. This was important to understand. It was not dark or secret in the thriller sense. It was lit with the same even building light as the archive beside it, lined with metal shelving, organized with the methodical precision that was his signature in every system he maintained. Box files labeled, folders cross-referenced, hard drives mirrored and backed up. And along the far wall, printed and pinned in the manner of his workroom on floor 17, but without the red string, because he did not need the visual map. He carried the map internally, had carried it for 15 years, the documentation. Violet stood in the doorway and looked at it. He watched her look. He had learned, over the months of watching her work, that her looking was a form of thinking, that her eyes moved through a space with the same analytical intelligence she brought to material problems, reading structure and intention and the relationship between elements. He watched her read the room. "How long?" she said. "Since I was 22, he said. "That's when I understood the full picture. It took 3 more years to start building the record." 12 years of documentation, she said. "Yes." She moved into the room. Not touching anything, she never touched things in new spaces without permission, one of the specific reciprocal courtesies they developed without discussing. She looked at the box files. at the printed documentation on the far wall. "Is it enough?" she asked. "It's enough," he said. "It's been enough for 3 years. I've been waiting for the crest, for the installation, for the moment when the public record of what she built is undeniable and present, and—" he stopped. "I wanted the thing that proves she mattered to exist before I made the case about the man who tried to erase her." Violet turned to look at him. "The installation is the evidence," she said. "The installation is the evidence that she was here," he said. "That her work is real and lasting and worth, that it outlasted him. And then the documentation is the rest." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the room, at the 12 years of careful, patient assembly. "He sent the letter because he's seen the fabrication materials," she said. "He knows what you're building. He's trying to get ahead of it." "Yes. Do you want to meet with him?" He had thought about this for 12 years. The meeting, the moment of being in the same room with Richard Cresswell as an equal, not the son of a woman who had no recourse, not the young man who understood what had happened but had no weight to bring to the understanding, but the person he had built himself into specifically for this purpose. Kane Capital, Kane Tower, the installation, all of it converging on a single room, a single conversation. "Yes," he said, "but not yet. Not until the installation is complete. Not until the crest materials are in place and the documentation record is filed and the thing she made is permanently part of this building." "February," Violet said. "February," he confirmed. She looked at him. The room was quiet around them, the basement stillness, the archive quiet, the weight of 12 years of documented truth on its metal shelves. "What does he know about me?" she asked. "Specifically." "More than I'd like," he said. "You're visible now, the interview, the installation, the access card records which Varden gave him before the board resignation." He paused. "He knows you matter to this project. He knows you matter to me. He will try to use that." "How?" He looked at her. He had been avoiding this part of the conversation, the part where the abstract threat became specific, where he had to say directly what he was afraid of. "He will try to offer you something," he said. "A commission, a career-making opportunity, the kind of thing that is hard to refuse and that comes with conditions attached, conditions that involve distance from me and this project." She looked at him steadily. "You think I'd take it?" "I think he'll make it very attractive," he said. "And I think," he stopped, "I think I'm afraid of it, of what he can offer that I can't match in conventional terms." Violet looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Adrian, I left Ohio with a duffel bag because the comfortable version was not enough. I have been in New York for 4 years turning down comfortable versions of things. I am not going to take a comfortable offer from a man who has spent 15 years being the villain of the story I've been helping you tell." He looked at her. "Also," she said, "I'm an artist. We do not, as a professional category, respond well to conditions." The almost smile, then the real one. He crossed the distance between them and held her face in his hands, the gesture that was his language, that he'd stopped managing and started simply doing, and looked at her with everything he had, unfiltered, the whole enormous thing. "February," he said. "February," she agreed. He kissed her in the basement room surrounded by 12 years of evidence, and the building was quiet above them, and the city went on doing what cities do. Above them, on the 18th floor, the installation waited. Above that, on the 17th, Elena slept. Above that, the rest, 42 floors of steel and intention, and everything he'd built it for. February, the crest materials in place, the documentation filed, the meeting arranged. The end of 15 years, the beginning of whatever came next. He held her and thought, this is what I was building toward. Not the meeting, not Cresswell, not the vindication. This. The rest was just the work. End of part 5. Cliffhanger. Richard Cresswell did not wait for February. He sent a second letter, 10 days after the first. This one did not come through the building's mail system. It came to Violet's apartment in Brooklyn. Hand-delivered, no return address. Inside, not a letter, a photograph. Violet and Adrian, outside the Crest, the day of the first documentation trip. His hand on the small of her back, her face turned toward his. A moment neither of them had known was being recorded. On the back, in handwriting she did not recognize. You should ask him what happened to the last woman. Who stood where you are standing. Not the one in the building. The one before.